So let's start off by a little shameless plug. This little show, cover our TV guide this week, X-Files, back. And how'd it do? You're not allowed to tell me, right? At least
soon.
until
We
Saturday.
can tell you, I think, tomorrow.
But
we think we're happy, and we'll know for sure tomorrow.
yes. Well, you should be happy. So you're not allowed to say this, but I'm allowed to say this. So it opened to 16.2 million viewers, 6.1 rating in the demo, helped, of course, by the NFL game. But the second episode killed it too. 3.2 rating in the demo, 9.7 million viewers. Not bad for a show that debuted 23 years ago.
Yes.
Yes.
So talk about that. I mean, this is a show that it took a while to actually get back and going. You did 6 episodes, which are continuing on. Clearly, you made the right call. Talk about that.
Well, first of all, as I look out at the crowd, I'm shocked there are this many people who want to hear us. And I'm looking at this table here, which is both of our families, and thinking they've heard us pontificate so much over the years that this is particularly painful for them.
I'm also feeling like there are a lot of people here that work for us.
Yes. They've never heard us
So we got a lot of
pontificate.
ringers in the audience then.
Anyway, X-Files.
Yeah.
When Dana and I first began talking about taking over supervision of the network, it was actually one of the first things we talked about was, could we bring the X-Files back for an event series? We had already put 24 into play, and there's been over the years so much clamoring for the X-Files, and every development season inevitably dozens of pitches would come in which would reference the X-Files to explain the tone or the content they were trying to create, and no one has ever really nailed that same tone. And of course, why not go back to the original? And David and Chris, I think, actually came to us. They had started talking about bringing it back, and so of course we were incredibly receptive, and they got Jillian back on board, and it was a pretty challenging set of deals to put together that probably took about
2 years.
4 or 5 months.
2
and
years.
Yeah,
I would say Howard Kurtzman sitting here, I'd say took 2 years off his life as he tried to negotiate those deals. But we're really happy that we did, and obviously the audience really responded to it, and as great as the live viewing of it, I think the delayed viewing, particularly as you look out over a 30-day period, I think it's going to be substantial, and people, I think, are going to watch it over and over again, looking for those little gifts that Chris gives in his programs for the people who watch it carefully.
Yeah, so Dana, let's make some news. Pick it up tonight. Pick it up right now.
Okay, done.
All right.
It's ordered.
Boom. But obviously,
Howard, go start making
Howard,
calls.
another 2 years off your life right now. But obviously, it's not going to be that simple. You've got stars who are very busy.
It's true. I mean, that's really what took us so long to put it together, is that David and Jillian work all the time. Jillian actually lives in the UK, and David lives between Los Angeles and New York, and David has Aquarius in production, and Jillian was doing a show in the UK. She was also doing Hannibal here.
Yeah.
So it was really hard to find a time that they could both be together, and Chris felt very strongly he wanted to go back to Vancouver, which was fine with me because it is my mother's hometown. We love Vancouver. And the show...
And there's 70-cent dollars there, so
Yeah,
we love that too.
That doesn't hurt. Doesn't hurt.
We love it because it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's why this is a good partnership.
Exactly. Exactly.
But it was really, it was so gratifying when they finally got back together. I have to say, watching the first day's dailies, you can just see this incredible chemistry between these two actors. They have just a remarkable partnership on screen. And even after all of these years, and The X-Files was one of the first shows I ever worked on when I got to the studio in '92. It was the first focus group I ever went to. I watched the pilot be tested in Burbank, where we still test all of our shows right now. And it was this remarkable experience where you could just watch viewers turning the dials up throughout a 2-hour pilot that just consistently built. And it really spoiled me. I had an expectation that it was just an easy process. And then the next pilot that I watched test was sort of eye-opening. They don't always go like that. But it was really gratifying for both of us to be able to bring it back.
Yeah, and obviously, there's been a lot of talk of reboots and remakes, and that's one of the hot topics of development and the networks over the past couple of years. You have so many coming up, including Prison Break coming back and a new version of 24. So is this a strategy that when you look at the X-Files, is this just sort of, does that work? Is there's something about that IP that cuts through the clutter, or what's the strategy behind all that?
Well, it is a little bit strategic, and it's also the great benefit of working at a company like 20th Century Fox Television, where we have this incredibly rich library of shows that have become fan favorites and have really lasted the test of time. And especially now when you have platforms like Netflix and Hulu and Amazon, where a lot of our shows have helped to build those platforms. A show like The X-Files or 24 or Prison Break really helped, generate so much excitement about those platforms, and a whole new audience was introduced. So when we do a reboot, or when we bring a cast like Prison Break or 24 back together, we're doing something for the original fans, and we're also introducing and continuing the saga for all of this new generation of viewers that have seen our shows on, Netflix or Hulu. And so part of it is strategic. We're going to be replacing American Idol on our schedule next year. This is the farewell season, sadly, although it's been such, a great experience. Although I will say when Gary and I were at the studio, we used to look over at the network for so long. 16 years before we worked at the network, and we used to say, pity the poor schlub that's going to be there when Idol is off the air. I didn't know I was going to be that schlub. Yeah. But so it is a daunting task, but we've really prepared for it. We're developing about 30% more shows this season, and we're looking to our heavy hitters like Prison Break and 24 to not only celebrate those shows and doing new installments and a whole new series on 24, but also they're iconic. Viewers recognize that IP. It won't be as taxing on our marketing team when we'll be launching so many new shows. We'll also have these iconic properties that viewers instantly recognize as standing for quality and compelling storytelling. And in each situation, the creators came to us first to say, Paul Shearing on Prison Break, Howard Gordon, Manny Cotto, and Evan Katz on 24, to say we have more stories to tell, and Chris Carter on the X-Files.
Yeah. Well, I've heard you say the 30% number before. Where's that going? Is it just more pilots this year? Is it more off-cycle development? Where is that 30%? How much is that in marketing?
Well, no, it's not in marketing, it's in development. So more scripts, more pilots, and it's going to result in more series. One of the things that seems to be changing so quickly in our business was only a few years ago where most network series were 22 episodes. It seems like now most network series are not, and I really think that's a response to what the audience has gravitated towards. And when digital networks like Netflix, Hulu tend to do 10-episode seasons, the cable networks are doing 10 to 13 episode series, it just feels this generation of viewer isn't interested with staying with shows for 22 episodes a year, particularly when you're interspersing 8 or 10 repeats during that run. It seems maybe CBS's audience will embrace that, but our audience is a good decade younger than their audience, and they're just not willing to embrace that type of viewing. How
do you monetize that, though, when you're only doing 10, 12, 15, 18 episodes?
It's hard. It's not a syndication model. It's much more of a SVOD model. Yeah. But shows like Empire, American Crime Story, I'm sure, American Horror Story, all these shows have SVOD deals that really, are equal to and sometimes exceed what we could have hoped for in syndication.
Yeah.
And now and then you get lucky and you get both, but I think those days are probably numbered.
Well, let's talk a little bit about SVOD because one of the hot topics is the Netflix and Amazons of the world, and they're sort of friend and foe at the same time. So more friend than foe, more foe than friend these days.
I think frenemy is probably the right term. On the studio side and getting to wear both hats, we get to enjoy this fantastic relationship with them on the studio side. You know, Netflix in particular was really built on the back of content from great studios like our own. And so, you know, as the home entertainment and DVD market started to shrink, the great news for especially serialized dramas was that Netflix came along and offered us huge deals for our content, and it compensated for, you know, the DVD market dwindling a little bit. As it grew bigger and bigger, and now that there's so much in the original content space, and they're producing original shows, and they're going after the same creators that we're going after, on the network side, it's very competitive. It's a little bit hard on the studio side for us to make deals with them because they want to control all the rights. So the old studio model is not, it's not meaningful to them. And so we've had a little bit of a hard time. You know, Bert Salke and Mark Pearson, who run Fox 21, our television studios, are here tonight, and they've really kind of wrapped their arms around two projects, you know, an original show for Hulu and an original series for Netflix, that we're trying to make sense of that model and trying to be flexible as a production company. So if that enables us to continue building great content into our library, continue to be a friend. If we can't figure out how to make a deal, it'll be a little bit challenging going forward. Again, we'll have to create great scenarios for great talent like Ryan Murphy and Howard Gordon and Seth MacFarlane of how they can be prolific and successful without going to SVOD companies. But our goal is definitely to be able to be in business with just any platform that we can make good sense out of.
And the other model is you also send Bert Salke over with a baseball bat.
Mark carries
Right,
the
Bert?
bat, Bert brings the wallet. It's a good partnership.
But what happens, you know, Netflix is spending $6 billion this year. At some point, the gravy train starts to run out. And what happens at that point to sort of the model that you guys have adopted with SVOD? And if there isn't that off-net money going forward, do you have to revert back to traditional seasons and maybe some of the traditional things that the networks used to do?
You know, the pay television ecosystem is about $105 billion of consumer spending. There's plenty of money in the market to compensate studios for their content. The SVOD ecosystem right now is about $5.5 billion. The ad-supported streaming system is about $7.5 billion. So the fundamental TV everywhere MVPD system is, you know, dwarfs these other systems. So I'm really not worried about what happens when they start getting more selective in what they want to buy as opposed to the output deals they were making 4 or 5 years ago. They may, you know, Netflix in particular, may have crossed the threshold where people will see value for just their original content and be willing to pay their $8 a month. But, you know, so far, it hasn't been the original content that's driven their growth. It really has been, it's a place to be able to access a lot of off-net programming. So I think they're going through a transition, and look, I admire what they've done. I think they're producing, what, 50 series this year? So they really, you know.
Yeah, 600 hours.
One of them,
originals.
either Ted or Michael Lombardo said, you know, we have to become HBO before they become Netflix or vice versa.
Yeah.
And you can see that's what Netflix has tried to become. They've tried to become HBO or Showtime and give the consumer value for original programming. But even if that happens, you know, with the amount of money in the system, I think, you know, we don't have to worry that, you know, as long as you're doing great, compelling, premium content, enough of that money is going to fall down to the studio that I think we're going to be just fine.
Well, another thing that frustrates a lot of your colleagues and probably frustrates you as well is the ratings issue and the fact that we don't really know who's watching the Netflix, especially the Netflix originals. Although NBC a couple weeks ago, you know, tried to, you know, sort of throw a wrench in that by releasing some data, which of course Ted Sarandos then turned around and said it was bogus. So I don't know what you guys get to see, or does that frustrate you that Netflix kind of gets to say what they want in terms of this is a hit, without actually backing that up with any numbers.
Yeah, I would say, listen, I think it's an extremely smart business plan. If I didn't have to release ratings, on our platform, we would not.
Yeah.
And it affords creators this great opportunity to, think their biggest thoughts, produce what they want, and not have to be judged on this sort of daily report card. So I understand it, I applaud it. The only time that I take issue with it is when Ted makes declarations about, orange is the new black based on its ratings or its data that they have on it, it would be the #1 cable show. Well, you know what, you don't get to have it both ways. If you don't want to release ratings information, you can't make claims about rankings. So that's the only time I get frustrated. I would say I'm less frustrated than some of our peers because, again, it's a little bit howling at the moon. This is their business plan. They're not going to change it. Nothing we say is going to prompt them to release ratings information. I thought NBC's strategy was interesting. I mean, we all were part of a trial with Symphony, the company that provided them with that information. It's an interesting new technology, which we support. Any information, any new metric that you can get on who's watching your shows is valuable. I thought it was just interesting that they would have taken such a large chunk of their TCA day to talk about the ratings of another platform, but it certainly did create a lot of news.
Yeah. No, I think the idea was, okay, people are watching Netflix, but they're still watching the traditional broadcast.
Right, but it was a lot of time talking about shows that actually, even if you looked at the metrics they provided, they were doing pretty well.
They actually didn't do that bad, yeah.
And again, I thought NBC had a very good story this fall, so I probably would have just stuck to my good story and waited for a season or a TCA where I didn't have anything to say or anything good to talk about, and then I would have talked about my competitors' ratings.
Well, there's something about Netflix that I think drives everyone a little crazy in this business right now. Is there a little bit of jealousy there? Is there sort of, you look at what they get to do, the amount of money that they're spending, and I gotta imagine you guys think sometimes, if I had that budget.
I think it's just looking at that soaring stock and knowing how many shares they probably have that makes others jealous. And apparently, they don't need to have a profit to generate stock growth, which is just sort of hard to understand.
Yeah.
And I will say that, 5-6 years ago when they were wooing us to sell them our product, they couldn't have been sweeter. They are a little less sweet now. So, but no, it isn't, they're not an existential threat. It's not a zero-sum game. We can both coexist in this market very comfortably. And I really, I don't frankly spend a lot of time worrying about them.
Well, speaking of ratings, I alluded to it earlier, but let's get back to it. So this premieres on Sunday night. Now, tell the truth, did you wake up and look at the overnights?
Absolutely. We're just here with our friends.
Exactly. I mean, you had to, right? Dana, you looked at them. I mean, you must have done a little, fist pump, a little,
I did, but, that's the trade-off we made, which is you can't fist pump the day, after your premiere because fist pump.
I did.
Oh.
Yeah, you did a little ugh.
Because for us, our decision that we weren't going to discuss overnights had so much to do with bigger issues in our business in terms of the morale of our creators and our team, how it felt to be at a network that has, a median age viewer that's much younger than, again, CBS, our competitors at CBS, and our viewers are migrating to delayed platforms and other platforms of viewing just at a more rapid rate. And it just felt like an irrelevant measure that demoralized people, and that if we weren't going to be able to walk the walk and say genuinely, we have the #1 show on broadcast with Empire. We had a huge premiere of X-Files. American Idol came back, this season as strong as ever, I think 6% off last season's premiere and beating the season average by about 22%. We're having a great season, but to our creative partners, our message is we're looking at a holistic picture. When you look at a show like Scream Queens that we just picked up for a second season, it's the perfect example of contemporary viewing. There's just an enormous amount of delayed viewing. It's hitting that sweet spot. It was the #1 show, comedy with 18 through 34-year-olds, a very elusive audience, and it was building 167% throughout multi-platform roll-ups. And trying to have a conversation with, Ryan Murphy or any of the cast of that show the day after it aired, it was just routinely having to say to them, we don't look at these numbers. This is not what we're judging you by. This is not relevant to us. And yet we're talking about them, and we're, our teams are struggling for placement and positioning of those numbers. It just felt more contemporary to just say, we're looking at 3-day growth, we're looking at 7-day growth. For shows that are owned by the studio, we're looking for a multi-platform roll-up, and that's how we're making decisions.
Also, if I could just add, we're selling our ad time on either 3-day or 7-day viewing. So it's roughly split 50-50. So literally no part of our business is based on live same day. And it just felt fraudulent to engage in trying to spin the press on live viewing.
Well, a show like Scream Queens, where, the majority of the viewers aren't watching it live, does it make sense to have it on the network, or does it make more sense to experiment with it on a streaming service, maybe on Fox Now or another platform?
Still the most lucrative TV series you can have is one that starts on broadcast, where you can establish it there. We still, derive an enormous amount of money through linear advertising, and then put it through the various ancillary distribution platforms. The ones that take place in the first year, in the current year, are things the network gets to monetize through stacking, and then after that year, the studios, whether it's our own or outside studios, get to sell SVOD rights, sell DVDs. They're selling international from the get-go. If you start a show downstream, whether it's on cable or premium cable or a digital network, you're really cutting off the first couple platforms where there's a lot of money to be made.
I asked because obviously you see what CBS is doing with the Star Trek remake and putting it on their service. I think
it's really about building asset value.
Yeah.
They're trying to establish, I think it's kind of smart. They're trying to establish that as an effective platform. So they're putting a pretty valuable piece of business there. It'll be interesting how they compensate the profit participants in that show, because they're not going to drive revenue, but maybe they'll drive asset value.
Yeah. You mentioned, so advertisers are standing up to C7 a little bit more, picking up a little more C7. In general, you guys feel okay with Nielsen right now, or do you still feel like they're kind of unresponsive in terms of expanding their measurement and really sort of getting the data out that you're looking for?
I would say that the audience is changing. It's so dynamic. I don't blame Nielsen for where they're at right now. I wish they were capturing a more accurate picture of, whether it's VOD, post 4 days, or Hulu or Fox Now. They're not tracking those viewers. And again, in a show like Scream Queens, on those 3 platforms alone, Scream Queens was averaging over 2 million viewers an episode. So that would make it, because I know this because I can say what the rating is, that would make it the second most successful comedy on cable, right behind South Park. So, does it feel challenging that we're not given credit through Nielsen for those viewers? Yes, but we're trying to be patient, and we know they're growing their sample, they're experimenting with other platforms, they've given us assurances that over a certain period of time they are going to be able to capture the whole viewer picture. Right now it's a challenging time. One of the reasons it's so challenging is the measurements aren't 100% accurate.
Let's talk about Empire, which you mentioned has been picked up for season 3. I saw you smile when I said Empire. It's a topic that I'm sure you appreciate talking about. That's also a franchise that's clearly important to you guys. We've seen a lot of franchises burn bright and then fizzle quickly through the years. How do you make sure that doesn't happen with Empire?
Well, it's really, it's relying on our really talented group of executive producers and writers, and so far they've done a fantastic job. I think season 2 has really stood up to season 1, and there was an enormous amount of pressure on them. But it kind of has been our philosophy since we've been running the studio is hire the best writers you can find and try to stay out of their way and clear away impediments for them and let them, encourage them to think big thoughts. A show like Empire, I think one of the things that's kind of unique about it is it just takes big, wild swings. It's just part of the soap opera storytelling. And, it's sometimes hard to find the line of, what's great, entertaining stories and what's just too much. And if they're not going over that line from time to time, then they're probably not really being bold enough and aggressive enough with their storytelling. We have an amazing cast that I think, is really a real secret to that show, is that you just can't imagine a better group of actors playing, particularly the family roles in that show. So it's obviously of enormous importance to us, and it's a big focus of our creative executives, and we feel between Eileen and Danny and Lee and Brian Grazer, that we just have a great team at the helm.
And of course, now you've got Star from Lee as well.
Yeah. You know what, Star is really special. We've seen all the dailies. It's finished principal photography. It's in post right now. Queen Latifah and Benjamin Bratt were fantastic, and these 3 girls were just such remarkable discoveries. They can all sing so beautifully. They really have so much talent, and I do want to echo what Gary just said about the cast. Sharon Klein, our head of casting, is here, and it's such a special skill that our team is so great at, which is pulling together the best and the brightest, and they have this incredible chemistry, and it's like this remarkable jigsaw puzzle that when it comes together right, you can't top it. And Empire, the cast is that way, and I will say on Star, I think people are going to be pretty blown away, and the music is spectacular.
I'm really worried about Lucius and Hakeem. Can they work it out? One of the things I wanted to ask you about is, obviously, if you look at the headlines right now in Hollywood, there's a lot of talk about the Oscars and the lack of diversity on the Oscars. Obviously, with shows like Empire and How to Get Away with Murder on ABC, seems like television is figuring it out. What can maybe TV teach film? What can film execs maybe learn from television that they're not doing right now?
Well, we feel really proud about the contributions our studio and network made to sort of improving diversity in television. 7, 8 years ago, it wasn't really the way it is now. And I think about shows like Glee and Modern Family, which were so inclusive. Glee, both from a racial perspective and also with such a prominent gay character. Modern Family with a functional or semi-functional gay couple, and the letters that we would get from, particularly gay young people about how meaningful to them the stories were on Glee or Modern Family, and how it gave them the confidence and the strength to come out to their friends or to their parents, really are touching, and you realize the power television has. But it really comes from a place of it's good business. I mean, it's great that it connects with how we feel socially. We're looking to be socially a positive influence on society, but it's really just great business that our shows tend to reflect what our audience looks like. I believe this year at the network, 44% or 42% of our cast is diverse, which pretty much lines up with what the figures are for our country as a whole. And I get the movie problem. The bets they take financially are enormous, and the rest of the world doesn't necessarily look like our country looks. So sometimes when you do a story that is heavily ethnic here, it's hard to go abroad and generate the kind of revenue that you might on something else. So it's difficult, but for us, our first concern is our market. We're looking to do shows that work here. And by the way, you do a show like Empire, and lo and behold, the international markets respond, and we do just fine.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Dana, because I've been covering this business for so long now, and I remember there were hearings in the '90s. There was so much hand-wringing for years about diversity, but it felt like, a couple years ago that the switch was finally flipped, and it finally started to really impact prime time. Do you think was there any moment, was there something that sort of perhaps triggered this sort of final move into diversity that the networks took?
Well, I think Gary was right. It took shows like Glee and that, were broad and were capturing the experience of such a broad group of people for our competitors and for our, creators to recognize that it's just great business. Again, Gary said it, we're not being politically correct, we're being smart business people. I will say I'm really proud of Empire, though. We call it the Empire effect. After Empire premiered, you would hear everyone saying, we want our empire, how do we get an empire? And I would say in the TV business right now, probably about the hardest role to cast is gonna be 30 to 40-year-old black man, because there are so many. I mean, it's just really a great time for actors, and we continue to make strides behind the scenes, and that continues to be part of our focus, and making deals with, female executive producers, with, the composition of our audience needs to be what our executive ranks and our creative ranks look like as well.
It's funny because we can be cynical in this business too, all the copycats, the old line that imitation's the sincerest form of television. But in this case, it actually, I forget who even said that, but in this case, it seems like it's a positive thing, that really everyone was looking for their empire this year.
We produce Fresh Off the Boat as well. There's a real appetite among viewers to see, even if you're not seeing yourself, to see different stories, to see different families, to experience what Ryan Murphy talks about all the time, which is Glee was not about any race or any different type of person. It was about feeling like an outsider. It was about shared emotion. It was about connecting with other human beings. And when you see the diversity that's on television right now, you say, yes, that looks like my family, but it's a little bit of a different way in. I laugh, I relate to them, I think ABC actually has done a really good job of that as well. They've taken their family comedy block and they've just shown as many families as they can, all funny, all relatable. I do think it is just a great time and that we're only getting better at this.
Well, let's go on to another topic I'm sure you guys love and talk about all the time. Is your predecessor at Fox killed pilot season? As a matter of fact, at TCA, he famously put a tombstone up on and it was over. Pilot season completely over. Not so much. You guys came in. I guess pilot season still lives on.
I appreciate what Kevin went through, because doing TCA after TCA, you begin to run out of original stories. So that was his thing, the death of pilot season. But I think
what's his spiel this year? The bird's overstuffed.
Yeah, the bird's overstuffed.
Yes.
Look, I don't really believe Kevin literally meant, no more pilots. I think he was commenting on the fact that across the industry, we made 90%, 95% of our pilots during the same 3-month period, which just meant we all competed like lunatics for a small group of talent, pushing up prices and rushing projects and settling for not quite the right choice, but it was the best choice available in a director or an actor. And, but our studios had a fairly long history of producing pilots out of cycle. Going back a ways, Prison Break was made out of cycle. Glee was made out of cycle. This year, Star, Lee's pilot was started before the holidays, so also well out of cycle. And I think for us, both at the studio and the network, the commitment we've made is we're going to order pilots when they're ready. And as long as we keep that flow up around the calendar, we're not going to find ourselves in a situation where we're reading scripts in January, February that are kind of good, kind of ready to order, but not really. And I think that's one of the real problems and risks of pilot season, is that you order things that aren't really ready. And they tend not to get better during the process because very quickly it starts piling on the prepping and the casting and all that.
Yeah, you got to admit, you hate pilot season, right? I mean, it's a crush, and the
I
casting.
don't hate it. Right now, I love it. Right now, everything is full of promise. There are great scripts. Nothing has fallen apart. It's just a great time of total possibility. The volume is a little crushing. You know, we look at so many of our great department heads are here, and during pilot season, they are just our business affairs, our casting area, our creative teams that are trying both to nurture our shows that are on the air, our first season shows like Grandfathered and The Grinder that we really, want to focus on at the network. Lucifer, which had fantastic awareness going into its premiere, a lot of buzz about that show. I won't talk about how it performed because I don't know yet. But, a lot of promise. And when you balance trying to maintain, we're producing around 40 shows and working on an additional probably 15 at the network, while also doing, 15 new series. It's asking a lot of your team. And the year of the writer's strike, we did 5 pilots, which included Glee, Modern Family, and Cleveland. So 3 of those 5 shows went over 100 episodes, and 2 of them went on to become some of the, 2 of the most successful shows we've ever produced. And it was not that surprising. They all got the benefit of total focus. And that doesn't happen now, although I will say, it puts a lot of great pressure on the teams to have the best material, to attract the best directors, to get the best cast. I'm so excited about our new 24, which we just cast with Corey Hawkins from Straight Outta Compton, just a brilliant young Juilliard-trained, phenomenal actor, and Miranda Otto, who had just a miraculous season on Homeland. She just couldn't take your eyes off of her. So when I think about Howard Gordon and Evan Katz-Manny, together with those 2 actors and Stephen Hopkins, who directed our original series pilot, I get really excited about it. So it's a good time.
Well, real quick before we go to Q&A, because the other big question, of course, your colleague in Building 103 sort of made this a phenomenon, but the too much TV question.
Content bubble.
Is there too much TV? Hashtag peak TV. From both a viewer perspective and from a business perspective, because those are 2 very different answers.
Well, I think from the perspective of the consumer, which maybe is the most important perspective, I don't think there's too much TV. Giving the consumer more choice can never be a bad thing. I will say, as a consumer, I get frustrated. There are more shows that I want to watch than I have time to watch, but still, you end up watching the ones that are most important to you. So I think it's a good thing for the consumer. It's an enormous challenge for networks because you're competing for an audience that has lots of different choices and is getting fractionalized. I think for studios, it's a fantastic time. There are so many outlets, and in this day of being able to monetize your shows sort of directly to people through digital platforms, you don't need necessarily that big audience that attracts, that's valuable to advertisers, as long as you have that passionate audience that will follow your show around. So I think it's a great time for studios. It's certainly an amazing time for talent. If you're a writer or an actor and you're not working right now, I suggest maybe you try a different profession. So it obviously creates business challenges, but I don't whine about it at all. I think it's really great for most constituencies.
But is there a bubble? As again, your colleague down the street believes there is. There may be a decrease as much as 100 in the coming years. And does that impact the business, or is that better for the business?
I actually do think that not as fast as John thinks. I think he said next year there'd be fewer shows, but I
think he said in an hour.
But I think in a couple of years.
He has a clock at home, actually. 14 for 14.
I actually had a meeting today with someone from our syndication division who said that we're trying to sell one of our shows into syndication, and the cable network said, nope, we don't have any money for that. We're investing in 2 original dramas that we're spending in excess of $2 million per episode. I promise you that they could spend a fraction of that on our show, and they're going to get higher ratings for it. And to try to, as a small cable network, to try to launch 2 dramas into this marketplace is very challenging. So I think some of the cable networks are going to recognize that original programming, which really is motivated by their desire to get higher carriage fees, to offer shows that are unique and special to an audience, I think you're going to discover that that is not quite as simple as they thought.
Yeah.
And even throughout the content bubble, as you know, John, who's so smart and extremely thoughtful about these types of issues, but he and we together developed American Crime Story, The People vs. OJ, which is maybe one of the best shows any of us have ever worked on. You know, certainly up there with some of our best series. And so 400 shows in production, scripted shows, that taxes our community. But even within that environment, the cream still rises. You can still have a breakout hit. You can still have an empire that's drawing, 22 million people plus an episode. So I think the sky is not falling, but it is certainly becoming more challenging. You know, it's not the easy business where you can have...
A little cloudy in the sky, actually.
It's not as cloudy as Sunday when we have our live production of Grease and it's supposed to pour. But yeah, it's harder.
Yeah. Well, we'll do a little sing-along for Grease Live at the end of this Q&A. But first, let's open it up to some questions in the audience. Who's got a cue for...
If anyone from Fox stands up, it will be a problem.
Well, they should be back reading scripts, right?
Right. They can ask their questions tomorrow in our staff meeting.
Maybe we just covered it all so well.
Yeah.
That,
Shy group.
Or it's... no one? There we go. Okay, we got a couple. I mean, I got more too, but...
In terms of like showrunners, do you find that there are certain qualities that stand out when you have really successful relationships with different people running your shows?
Yeah, we have great relationships with a lot of people that we've worked with for a really long time. Ryan Murphy, Seth MacFarlane, Steve Levitan and Chris Lloyd, Howard Gordon, Alex Gonza. You know, we've been in business with a lot of the same creators for a really long time. And the ones that we stay in business with are the ones who are truly inspired writers. It's got to start there. It starts on the page. Any great show starts with the vision of a creator, and then you have to have great leadership skills because you're making, a little movie every episode in 8 days. It's a very stressful process. It requires enormous discipline, and you have to delegate. And, when I look at Ryan, who's done Scream Queens, American Horror Story, and OJ, all in the same season, and you watch him up close, he's an extraordinary leader, and he makes a decision on a dime, and he is just making 200 decisions every day, and he makes it, and he moves on, and he makes it, and he doesn't sweat it. He doesn't think about, could I have made it 10% better? Was that the exact right decision? He knows that to be able to accomplish what he has to, you got to just keep moving forward. So leadership and then talent.
Thanks. OJ's a show that, in hindsight, you kind of wish it was on FBC, or, that's just the way it goes.
Well, the good news is it's still our show.
It's still yours.
Sure, it would have been great to have it on FBC, but it's a little bit of a long story, which we've told. But at the time that Ryan Murphy got involved, and we wanted to make it in a way that made sense, make it part of a series, and he thought American Crime Story was the way to go, an idea that he had pitched to FX. It just made the most sense to embrace FX and do it there. And they're a sister division. It's a big win for the company, and it's obviously great for our studio. So we're fine with that.
I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but OJ did it. Sorry. Who else has got a question? We got one over here, and over there.
Hi, what is it about Empire that made you give it the green light? Was it the marketplace? Was it the script? I mean, I saw the first episode, and quite honestly, I don't know that I was excited about it, but I stuck with it. But you saw something in it that made you give it the green light. What was that?
Ouch. I loved that pilot. You know what? We weren't at the network at the time it was ordered. We were at the studio. We developed it there. Empire started with our head of creative affairs at the studio saying he wanted to do a hip-hop soap opera. And he called one of our great partners, Brian Grazer from Imagine Television, who's partners forever with Ron Howard, done great work together, 24, Arrested Development. And he said, I really want to develop a show in this space, and clearly after 8 Mile and a lot of the music projects that Imagine has been involved in, they had a lot of contacts. Brian went back to his agents at CAA, who also represent Lee Daniels and Danny Strong, and they had sort of simultaneously the same idea. So Joe Cohen, the agent, put everyone together, and from the moment we heard the pitch, which it was a great pitch, and it felt broad, and there were, a soap opera story engine is pretty hard. You don't have, it's not cops or lawyers or doctors. There's not a normal franchise. You really have to hear a lot of story in the pitch. And just the notion of, a hip-hop mogul having a gay son and what the consequences would be in that circumstance and what that relationship would be, and Cookie, who was paying a price for crimes that helped establish that company, and her relationship with her boys, and, King Lear of who's going to succeed the father. There were just so many elements that felt really, ripe for a great soap opera that we just hadn't heard before. And when you're in these jobs for, 23 and 25 years, you've heard a lot of pitches. So when you hear one that you go, that's original, that feels like something that will be, that done right could be a real lightning rod. And that's exactly what it was. And I actually did love the pilot. I thought there were elements of it. That music, I mean, it's incredible. That show turns out 1 or 2 hits every episode, and you have, music producers like Timbaland and Neo creating original music for your TV show. It's a special show. It packs a lot of entertainment in every episode. So we sold it. Kevin Riley bought the show when he was in our job at the network at the time. And then we scheduled it. We looked at the first week of January as we sat in our scheduling room, and all of the networks just sort of cleared out at the beginning of the year, and we saw a great opportunity for American Idol together with Empire, a night of music. And then we just spent a ton of money making sure as many people as possible knew that we love this show and that it's something special and that there's a great reward for tuning in.
Drip, drop, drippity drop.
That's right. Classics.
You could be on that show.
Yeah, exactly. Who else? Over here.
Thank you guys so much. I was curious to know about a time that you guys failed and what you learned from it.
I'm sorry.
Failure and what we learned.
Yeah.
Oh,
What's
failure
your-
really
your-
sucks.
Your favorite failure.
Obviously we're in a business where there is so much failure that you have to really learn to accept it and deal with it. And still, it's incredibly painful to work on a show and get to know the showrunner and the cast and work on the stories and just love it and see the potential and the value in it, and then the audience just doesn't show up. And at the studio, it was always pretty easy to blame it on the network. It was bad scheduling, bad marketing. Now, when you run the studio and the network, there's not a lot of places to look other than in the mirror. But, we have learned things, I'm trying to think, there's been some shows that we thought ultimately we had a really bad title that didn't get across to the audience what the show's about, or gave the audience the wrong idea about a show. There's certainly been shows where we've thought we've had the wrong lead actors, and so somehow that chemistry was never found. The lessons tend to be pretty specific to the individual show, but you never get used to the failure.
Do you guys have sort of the one that got away?
I would say Arrested Development, which was so celebrated, but a bit before its time, and being able to do a new season, recently for Netflix was very gratifying. It was one that you just kept seeing the episodes, and they were so great, and it just wasn't attracting the size audience, even after it won the Emmy, to really justify additional seasons. That was one I look back on and feel pretty bad. I actually think this'll, I think Gary would agree, Terra Nova. I felt like it was just a huge, big, ambitious shot, and it actually did perform well, but there was just a disconnect with, Kevin at the time, who was at the network. He just didn't really see it the way we did. And I would say the thing that is most painful is that a lot of shows take a while to find themselves and to become great shows. I mean, there are so many stories in history: Seinfeld, Cheers, X-Files really wasn't a hit off the bat, 24. How I Met Your Mother took 3 full seasons to break out, and then finally we had Britney Spears in the middle of just her meltdown, and people were so fascinated by her that our ratings on the night that she was a guest on the show doubled. And about 70% of that audience stayed with the show, went on to become a big hit. There's just not that opportunity anymore because of the content bubble.
Britney Spears on Terra Nova would have been great. You guys, in hindsight, send her back to the dinosaurs.
We did a series a number of years ago now with Jim Cameron and his company, starring Jessica Alba, that stayed on a couple years. It was a huge international hit. It didn't work great on the network, although that 4 rating it was doing is probably something we'd be very happy with now. And that was one that I think we really missed as a company.
I love some of the I love some of the actors we've had in our shows, and the shows that don't go, and the comments that you get when we were at the studio from the network people. Like we had Jeremy Renner in a pilot, and the head of the network at the time, who was not Kevin, said he's just not a TV star. Right, he's a big movie star. Heath Ledger, just on and on, that, just timing's not right. You have to produce a phenomenal show, and it also has to be done at the exact right moment.
Yeah. Do we have time for one more? Or, yeah, time for one more. Right over here.
I would love to get your perspectives on reality programming from the standpoint of the financial investment, the upside or not of syndication. Are they, in the big scheme, anomalies for you, especially in terms of prime time, or here to stay and getting better and better and more successful?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because that's something we didn't really, you addressed Idol earlier, but we haven't really talked much about it. 10 years ago, remember the scripted, the writers were freaking out because all their time slots were going to reality, and the pendulum has swung the other way. So what's the state of reality right now?
Well, it's challenging. There's been so much unscripted programming over the last 15 years or so that it's really hard to find something that feels unique and different, that doesn't feel derivative. I think that's probably the single biggest challenge that everyone has. Plus, I think most networks look to put, at least broadcast networks, look to put their unscripted shows on during the summer, so they're all competing with each other, cannibalizing each other. There are a lot of time periods taken up by legacy shows that have been there for a long time, Survivor and Dancing with the Stars and which one?
Big Brother.
Big Brother and Voice, and a lot of shows that are 10, 12 years old, even older, and still surviving. For us, it's a very important part of our business. We are looking to, as part of the solution to replacing Idol, we're really hopeful that we're going to have a great unscripted show to take up some of those 30 to 40 hours that have been devoted to Idol over the past seasons. But we're pushing our development team to look for something that feels Fox-like, bold, original, a little unique. Big characters, I think, is something Fox does well. The economics of unscripted have gotten much more difficult. It doesn't seem to have that same ancillary value the way scripted shows do. You think you have to work a little harder to monetize them, and if you come up with that great original idea and you can format it around the world, there certainly is money to be made. So it's It's probably, you know, in the 18 months or so that we've been doing this, I'd say maybe it's the biggest challenge we've had is to try to find our Fox space in the unscripted world. And but we're really committed to doing it.
When all else fails, you always have Gordon Ramsay yelling at people, calling them donkeys.
You know what? It works. And Gordon is an iconic Fox star. He's a great example of Gordon Ramsay cookie. You know, those are Jack Bauer, House, iconic Fox, big, bold characters. Simon Cowell on Idol.
Peter.
Yeah.
So Grease Live this Sunday, and you're actually doing quite a few big events this year. You're doing The Passion. You've got a lot more in store. You got Rocky Horror down the road. So these events, this is sort of a big part of being a broadcaster now.
You said we had finished.
I just keep on going.
And now you just went back into questions.
Exactly. You could just nod and say, yeah, live. I'll wrap up
No,
with...
it is,
No.
I will
Yeah.
say very quickly, it is very important. It's an important part of our schedule, and it's an important part, we feel, of what it means to be a broadcaster, which is there are going to be big, live, exciting events that if you want to watch, you know, the tightrope act, you're going to watch it live. It's a little bit like sporting events. And our Grease Live, which airs this Sunday night, is so ambitious. It's going to feel unlike anything I think anyone has seen in this particular space. And I think we both admire what NBC has done, you know, with The Wiz or Sound of Music. But this is going to take place on 3 different stages on the Warner Brothers lot. They go in between the stages. Jessie J is opening it with Grease is the Word, and she'll take us all the way through all of the sets and outdoors, which, again, it's supposed to pour rain. So it will be the one day in Los Angeles that you couldn't anticipate, just great weather. But we're prepared. Tommy Kail, the director of Hamilton, which is just the most sensational new show on Broadway that took my breath away, and he is every bit the director you would expect when you sit with him, just ambitious, has the best team, has the biggest vision, and he's doing it together with Mark Platt, who produced shows like Wicked. So you have this huge experience and this bright new light in theater, and the combination has been extraordinary. A phenomenal cast where you have Julianne Hough and Aaron Tveit, Keke Palmer, you know, Carly Rae Jepsen, Boys to Men, our teen Angel, the Frankie Valli role, like just great, fun reinventions, and I think it's going to be a great night.
Yeah, my colleague Rob Moynihan's calling it the Grease Nino, so we'll look forward to that. So final thing real quick, I went back and looked at the old Variety archives, the story I wrote in December 1999 when you guys were first put together as presidents of 20th Century Fox TV, and remembered asking you guys, so how's this going to work? How are you going to split duties? But clearly it worked. So congrats, guys. Thanks a lot for coming. Good talking to you.